So, David Walker, thank you so much for joining me on this series of Crack the Ceiling as we kick off Pride Month.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's the most wonderful time of the year. One of the most wonderful times of the year, Pride. It's a fantastic opportunity to celebrate all of our differences and get our rainbow flags out. And so I really appreciate you joining me to talk to me. And David, I've known that you've been involved in the LGBTQ community. And when I met with you last week, I mean, we talk all the time, but when we talked about this interview, and I asked you about how you got into activism. And what I thought you were going to tell me about is what you usually hear when you talk to people who who grew up gay, especially in Midwestern USA in the 80s. That was when you probably had felt so isolated and alone and needed to get into activism so you could have an opportunity to fight the homophobic trend that you may have been experiencing. But that's not when it happened. You actually had a pretty, very open, very, you're able to express yourself. You had parents who were very welcoming and wanted you to be yourself, and you were able to be pretty authentic as a young man growing up in Midwestern USA. But it was when you moved to Miami where you thought, hey, this is a place where I can really express myself and find out who I really am. That is when tragedy struck. And that's when you became, horrifically exposed to homophobia in its most violent way. If you want to talk to me about how that happened and how that propelled you into knowing you got to do something about this.
Yeah, so thank you. It was really interesting growing up in the 70s and 80s. So I'm a product of some flower children parents that were all about peace and love, and I didn't really understand boundaries as other people did as I was growing up. My rules at home weren't the same as other kids, where they had certain things they had to do or were taught one thing was right or wrong. I was taught love and understanding, and I took that with me when I was in school, when I was in high school. I did super well. I was class president, all those things. And then I went to college in Miami, Florida, thinking that I would finally have a place where I could go be with many other people that were out and enjoying life. And I lived on South Miami Beach when I went to the University of Miami. So one day I was out, one evening, because Miami social life. So one of my friends, who was a dear friend of mine, who was a Ford model, his name was Milan, and was a heterosexual, but just a beautiful human being in every way, physically and spiritually, just a really good person and someone I was proud to call my friend. And he was proud to call me his friend too, and didn't have the same boundaries that others did, where he had rules and restrictions that were imposed by society. So we went to clubs and we had a great time. And as we were walking out, a car pulled up and it came to a screeching halt, and people ran out and they were screaming and had a baseball bat. So I was able to run, and I went into an alley. And anybody that's been in Miami Beach, it's all alleys or just a few main streets. And I watched them catch Milan and take him to the ground and beat him with a baseball bat, and he ended up dying. So it was a life-changing experience. Yeah. It was something that I didn't understand, because even in the 70s and 80s, I understood where we couldn't really talk about things in certain crowds, but nothing like that. Yeah. At the University of Miami, I was part of the Gay Student Alliance. And in order to become part of that, we had to go meet the Dean of Students privately, where he asked us very specific questions to find out if we were authentic, to protect us. Mm-hmm. This is at the same time. So at that time, I didn't really know what to do. So I started investigating, and through this Gay Student Alliance at the University of Miami, and the dean there, his name was Dean Walker, which is kind of cool. And he lived on South Beach also. So we became friends, and he helped me with this advocacy. So we researched, so this was in 1989. In 1990, I was getting ready to graduate, and I was president of my fraternity in college. Everything was great. I was out. Everything was great on campus. Um, I followed George Bush at that time, George Bush Sr., who brought in the Hate Crime Statistics Act in 1990. And I was very interested because 20% of all of the hate crimes were enacted by law enforcement. Another 60% was domestic. It was all home, people experiencing pressure at home. And then the rest were public acts like the one that I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to find out what organizations I could become part of. And there was a small group of people, the Human Rights Campaign, which later on became the champion for not just hate crimes, but equality for everyone, for whatever their differences may be or whatever minority group they're part of. So I became part of the Human Rights Campaign and followed again onto Bill Clinton, who had this really great weekly radio show, and all presidents do, but his was amazing because Bill Clinton was the first one to say that hate crimes were actually an act of violence against America itself.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the first president that I believed was really inclusive and made sure that everyone understood that we're all Americans, no matter what. So uh, I, I I changed my political affiliation then. I was a Republican. I moved on to becoming a Democrat because I lined up more with their values,
Mm-hmm.
which is later on led me to Barack Obama, who did some wonderful things for us. So so that was in 1997. So just imagine, so 1989 to 1997, I was waiting for some good news from somewhere. And what the Human Rights Campaign does is we would sponsor dinners, fundraisers all across the country, different events. And my background is in hospitality, so I was really a great organizer for events. So I found just a good spot in the organization. And what was so much fun was organizing, planning these events with an agenda. And the agenda was to find politicians that backed up all of our rights and could speak freely, maybe even some gay leaders. You know, this year we even had a presidential candidate that was an out gay man, which is the first in history. But so fast forward, 1998, we had a really moving event here, Matthew Shepard, and it was a turning point for all of us. I mean, and we know that Matthew Shepard was picked up in a bar. He was taken out to a field and he was beaten to, well, not to death, but hung up, and a cyclist thought he was a scarecrow hanging. And then a few days later, he passed. So it took many years for the House and Senate to really pass acts that became law. So part of my journey was supporting this. In that time, the year 2000 was a great year. The last March on Washington, the Millennium March, where 1 million people gathered. There were speakers like Ellen DeGeneres.
Oh, I remember seeing on TV. Yes.
Yeah. So I sent you some pictures, and one of them was Ellen on a screen in front of the Capitol building, and millions of people on the lawn. Well, 1 million people, which is enough, right? So then we end up with Barack Obama, and in October 2009, the Matthew Shepard and the James Byrd Anti-Hate Crime Prevention Act became law. And so we weren't quite. So that was in October 2009. 2009. And that was President Obama. So just imagine all of those years, and the legislation that happened, and sometimes there were some repeals. For instance, in 2007, the Hate Crimes Act was stripped from the Department of Defense legislation. So this is 2007, and only 2 years later, Barack Obama overturned that. So it was very important for all of us. So all of this time, I was out canvassing and going to different events. My friends throughout the country, we made it our social circuit to go to Denver, or to San
Yeah.
Francisco, or to Washington, D.C., or New York, or
Yeah.
even Miami, and in Cleveland. Cleveland had great events also, and which were amazingly booked. So I found out that the Midwestern community is so accepting.
Yeah.
It's where we meet the rural areas where people, aren't exposed to the same
Mhm.
life, and the cross section isn't the same.
Mhm.
So what the other thing that was really important to me was obviously same-sex marriage. So that's another journey in itself, which is kind of a simultaneous trip. I have always wondered, if I go to an emergency room, who's allowed in. If I pass, who has the rights to my property? As I get up in years now, I'm acquiring some things, but who has the right to this
Mm.
and will not have to pay taxes because they've shared in whatever it is that I've accumulated over life. Like Edith Windsor, and there's an act, it's the Defense of Marriage Act of 1996. And what that said was that the states could go ahead and acknowledge same-sex marriage. However, Section 2 said that the territories had the right to legally recognize, but the territories also had the right to deny or not recognize marriage, which was very, very tricky. And now this included property. So what happened with Edith Windsor was she was a lesbian, and her partner had passed, and they had accumulated property together, and she had to pay almost $400,000 in taxes for property that was hers. Now, in June 2013, the DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, Section 2 was overturned in 2013. And Human Rights Campaign was a driver there. Not only Human Rights Campaign, but at this time, corporate sponsors got involved. So, and to the tune of 300 that sent petitions to the Supreme Court. So that was really exciting for all of us, because it was really Section 3 of DOMA that needed overturned. And that's where the federal government recognized same-sex couples. And that was for all benefits, taxes, Social Security benefits, all of the different things that go along with federally recognized marriage. So it was Obergefell and Hodges versus Hodges in 2015, where we finally got to the point where the corporate push really sent it over the edge, sending petitions to the Supreme Court, so that in 2015, June, the federal government recognized same-sex marriage. So we're not finished.
No, by any stretch of the imagination. But you have
So that's our
come a long
history
way.
lesson.
But David, do you feel like when that act was passed, the Hate Crime Act, back in, was it 2009? What year was that?
So the Matthew Shepard Act was
Yeah.
2000, that became law was in 2009 with Barack Obama.
Mm.
So there were several acts in between,
So
but the finally law in 2009.
yeah. So do you feel at that point you got vindication for your friend Milan? I mean, he was killed in 1988, you said, right?
1989, yeah.
1889, and then all the way up until almost 2 decades later. Do you feel you got him some vindication?
I that's really interesting. What happened at that time was, so 9 years later, Matthew Shepard. So I kept hearing of more and more and more stories. So it was no longer my friend Milan. It was everybody. And how could we as a country, like Bill Clinton said, that violence against anybody is violence against America in itself. So I do believe that Milan's death was vindicated, but I think that so many others had to go along the way. And for hate crimes, anti-hate crime to the act to become law in 2009. We're not too far away from that time.
Yeah.
What's amazing though is a transition. So yes, I believe that there's been some justice. I'm sorry that this man, his future was taken away from him, but so many others, right? So what's really important to me today and to all of us today is what are we doing now? Now we look at this corporate culture, and we're putting together some sort of statements or rules and diversity and inclusion groups. You and I are both on a committee for diversity and inclusion for S&P Data, and we're doing great things. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing here. And if you go on the internet, you're going to find out that's happening everywhere. And the corporate sponsors that helped make same-sex marriages legal are really the drivers right now for the human rights campaign, major funders, and also changing the tone for everybody. Just in the workplace, to walk into an office and say, you know what, I'm married, and someone says, to whom? Not what is her name? That sort of thing. I'm not married. And I don't know. It's not the topic, but
No pressure.
but I have that right.
Yeah,
and
you do.
and properties can be shared, and people can come and visit me in the hospital, and we're a long ways from where we were. But now it's time for the rest of us to stand up in our regular daily life. And I haven't been an activist that has been wearing bright colors and going to parades, and that's not me. How I've been an activist is to be a good, stable business person, have been always openly out. I've never hidden who I have been. I've always encouraged others to be who they can be and who they are, and made sure that others, and I've always defended the underdog, that others make sure that they understand how it feels to be on the other side occasionally. We had a situation recently about some gossip that was targeted toward me, and our company stood up and did the right thing and said, you know what, we're going to figure this one out together. So I think it's things like that that are important for us today. S&P Data is doing a great job. You're doing a great job. The things that you bring to us, this Crack the Ceiling, is just amazing, the series. And now it's in the hands of all of us. There are enough laws passed that we can take that momentum personally and in our business lives, and cascade that down into individual families and how we impact everybody now. So we're in a good place today.
I think so too. I think you're right. We have a ways to go. It's not exactly where we want it to be, but I would say thanks to people like you who got involved and worked to make a difference. Now it's normal. It's not. We were talking about that commercial. We were both joking about that. That gum commercial where you have same-sex couples kissing, and it's not a big deal. Like I had to watch it 5 times until I even noticed it. So that's what's almost really, that's what I loved about that commercial. Is that, and it's from activism, and how we can all be activists. You don't have to march with a sign in your hand necessarily, but you can be an activist by who you're choosing to, where are you going to spend your money? Are you going to spend your money with a company that is not supportive of gay rights, and some that are actually known to be overtly unaccepting of homosexual rights? Where are you going to spend your money? Where are you going to choose to do your business? And that's where everyone can be an activist in one way, shape, or form or another. In an office is to not participate in any sort of activity or gossip or conversation that has an undertone of systemic homophobia. And when you recognize it and call it out, people notice, and it changes the nomenclature of the company, and it just creates a more accepting environment for everybody. And that's your goal. And your goal, as you said, and just being the kind of person that you are, is that you weren't so much concerned about gay rights as you were about human rights. And
For
I
sure.
think that's what activism should be all about, is that a crime against one is a crime against many. And
Yeah.
if you stand by, do nothing, then you're guilty yourself. So
We are in a different world today.
we are.
And I appreciate this interview. I think it's very important just to speak. But I mean, look where you are with rappers. Lil Nas X is amazing. And the statements that he makes are just outrageous. He DM'd me on Twitter and told me to keep going because I laughed because there's somebody that was just cursing him out, and he said, I think I'll just sample that. And he just rolled with it.
Yeah.
And then we have teenagers now that in high school that can identify however they choose. And it feels so good to have been part of a movement that allows people all of these freedoms today in the United States. Canada's been a little different. I used to use Canada as a haven and go to Pride in Toronto and have a great time and watch same-sex people hold hands. And there were always some pockets of the United States, like Minneapolis, Minnesota, or San Francisco, or Key West, or Greenwich Village. There's always been pockets, and even South Beach. But I just told that story. But today is a different world, and we live in a society that is truly accepting. There are others that need to be brought along, but I think we can do that gently.
I think so too. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it. Happy Pride Month. So I expect to be seeing more of you during the Pride Month. Pity we can't meet in person, but I hope to spend a lot more time with you and talk more about this and what we can all do to lift human rights for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.